So, good morning, Vera. Thank you so much for joining me. I've really been looking forward to this talk. And, we first met last year when I was doing the wonderful course with Neurodiversity Training Academy on
Mm.
ADHD practitioner, and you were one of the instructors. Is that the correct term to use, by the way, instructor? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, some people say trainer or teacher, instructor
Yeah.
is fine, whichever one works for me.
Yeah. Well, in
Yeah.
any event, it was really so like eye-opening for me, and that's why I was really keen to have a conversation with you separately, just so that I could explore a little bit more about your world. So just to kind of briefly introduce yourself, and if I forget anything, please, just jump in. So
Yeah.
you are a coach where you did your coaching initially through the Functional Medicine Coaching Academy,
Mm.
which is approved by the UK and International Health Coaching Association, and it is also accredited by the International Coaching Federation. So you have really a great sort of what's the word, sort of profile around coaching. And now, as well as running your own business, you are also doing work with Kim at the Neurodiversity Training Academy, and you're heading up the training and research and development for her.
Mm.
So it sounds like you've got like a full plate there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I mean, first of all, thank you for having me. I've been really looking forward to our conversation as well. It's a pleasure to be here. Yeah, so I think you nailed it. I kind of wear two hats. I'm running my own business where I'm primarily a health coach. So I really focus on the health and well-being side of ADHD and kind of the coexisting conditions around that. And then in my other role, I'm working for the Neurodiversity Training Academy, and I'm teaching and developing new training programs. And yeah, so that's kind of me in a nutshell. Yeah.
Great. So I suppose to kick off, what might be interesting for people to understand, and just I know it can be very complicated, but maybe just from a
Mhm.
very like high level overview, maybe you could sort of explain what is lifestyle medicine and what is functional medicine. But I know it's a very complex subject. So just from a high level overview.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Of course. So, functional medicine is kind of a philosophy and a practical approach how to look at health and disease. So, it's really trying to understand the root causes of where does chronic disease come from. And you can kind of imagine it like you're looking at um, first of all, what are all the positive things that are going into your body and into your overall well-being, your mind, and what are the negative things? So you're looking at, your food, your stress levels, your relationships, the physical environment you live in, the relationships you have. So you're kind of taking a 360-degree approach to looking at a person and all those factors. And then you look at that basically from before their birth. So you start with the health of the mother in the pregnancy.
Okay.
And so you kind of look at that timeline for a person, how has their health developed over their lifespan? And that can really give you very powerful insights to recognize, how has a certain disease process started? So let's say autoimmunity, gut health issues, whatever it is, you can trace it back through that and kind of link that up. And then the approach to kind of treat that, if you will, is to basically work on improving all the positive things that go in and taking all of the negative things out. So working on your stress levels, your nutrition, and all of those other aspects as well.
Yeah.
So the difference between lifestyle medicine and functional medicine would be, well, lifestyle medicine covers everything that you can address with your lifestyle, literally, right? So anything that's like easily under any person's control, well, not easily necessarily, but it's under any person's
Yeah.
control to some extent, right? And what functional medicine offers beyond that is that they do very advanced lab testing and things like that that would be done on a more medical level. So that really goes beyond coaching, where you look at, what are the optimal levels rather than the standard reference ranges and things like that. So that's kind of the main difference between the two. Lifestyle medicine is kind of like covers a subsection of
Right.
functional medicine.
Something more within your own control, essentially, from a
Yeah,
lifestyle.
exactly. And I mean, lifestyle medicine is very widely recognized now as being taught in medical schools and all of that. And with functional medicine, we're not quite at that point because it takes a massive mindset shift, how you think about the body and health and disease. And I think we're getting there really, like the science is all like supporting that very much. But to get that to filter into medical practice and to filter into medical teaching, that takes a long time.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're not quite there yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah, I'm really fascinated with because I'm a real believer that yeah, I mean the mind is a incredibly powerful tool, and if we know how to use it to our best ability, it can make a huge difference in our life. And yeah, so the way you sort of treat your mind and your body and your environment, I think all plays a role in how you operate in life. So going further on that, now obviously I'm looking at it more from an ADHD lens rather than just a sort of a generic, I've got a problem and I'm coming to you uh,
Mm.
for some help. So it is a quite a common sort of occurrence that somebody with ADHD would have a lot of prevailing health conditions too.
Mm.
Um, what would you, if it's possible to even sort of have a kind of an overview of it, but what could one think would be sort of associated health conditions with somebody who has ADHD? What would be
Mm.
common, do you think?
Yeah, right. So if we look at this from the perspective of research, what kind of are the health conditions where we have good research about the connections with ADHD and with good statistics on them? That's first of all of the mental health conditions. So we know that there are hugely increased rates in anxiety and depression, co-occurring conditions like bipolar disorder, um, eating disorders as well. So a lot of conditions, addictions also. So a lot of conditions that have kind of a crossover to mental health issues. There are, of course, other neurodivergences. So, autism, dyslexia, all of those type of conditions as well, sensory processing issues. So all of that's quite well covered. And then more recently, we see more research into other more physical chronic health conditions. So chronic pain conditions like fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome are much more prevalent. Digestive health issues are more prevalent. Very recently, the last few years, there's been much more conversation around diseases with the connective tissue, so Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, hypermobility type syndromes. So those are the ones where we have quite good data on. But if you look at it from kind of like a medical practice or clinical practice point of view, we do pretty much see all chronic health conditions in a higher prevalence in ADHD. And if you want to, we can talk about why that might be.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my next question is
Mhm.
why would it be like that? I mean, I suppose some are to some degree self-explanatory. So, I mean, like maybe stomach issues, because oftentimes stomach issues are also linked to anxiety, and somebody who's ADHD might have high levels of anxiety, which could have a negative impact on the stomach and the way the stomach is supposed to be efficiently managed or operating. So I kind of can understand that link, but it would just be interesting to understand why would somebody with ADHD have all these kind of associated chronic conditions?
Yeah, right. So there are a lot of factors that play into that. One very obvious one is heightened stress levels that are associated with ADHD. Part of living with undiagnosed ADHD for a long time, but even if diagnosed, if ADHD would have been diagnosed in childhood already, we have more sensitive nervous systems. Our nervous systems are much more living in the stress response, the fight or flight response.
Yeah.
We really struggle to relax. So those kind of aspects, they really mean that, and that's where that like lifespan perspective is really helpful to understand this, that over your entire lifespan, if your body doesn't very often go into rest and digest, parasympathetic state where your body relaxes and it does all of the important repair work in your tissues, cleaning out waste, all of those things that need to happen to keep a body healthy, they just don't happen as much. Sleep is another big one because there are so many more struggles with sleep, partly because of our nervous system, again, not relaxing as much, lots of other factors going into that. So your body just doesn't recover as well. And that contributes to the development of a whole host of these
Right.
conditions. And then it really kind of depends on, the individual person. What is their genetic makeup, perhaps? Where do they have a weakness in their genetic code? So they're more susceptible to one condition than another. We know all of these things run in families. But then also, their environmental factors, what's been happening in their life and in their environment that perhaps predispose them to one condition rather than another.
Yeah.
So that's kind of
Yeah. And,
information.
yeah. And I see obviously the link where, like functional medicine would come into play, because if you're looking at like the history of somebody and also like pre-birth almost, like mother's history, um, because if you have, had, well, which you would have had anyway, but I mean, if ADHD was undiagnosed as a child, and already some of these existing or these health conditions started appearing and they were never managed well, and your ADHD was undiagnosed, I
Yeah.
guess you can see how it turns into sort of a chronic illness. It's really interesting. So further to that, so say, I come to you and I have ADHD, but I also obviously have a series of different health conditions. Um, I'm not sleeping well. I have maybe, like hypermobility, which sort of turns into sort of chronic, like issues with my joints.
Mm.
And I have some stomach issues. Um, so it can be quite overwhelming for an individual to, know that there's all these things on top of the fact that you've also now got maybe, you've recently been diagnosed with ADHD and now you
Mm.
think, oh my heaven, what, how am I ever going to manage all of this? So
Mm.
it's overwhelming for somebody. So, you can't obviously fix everything like, it would be lovely,
Yeah.
wouldn't it? If you could just snap your fingers and it all would be fixed. So like, what would you recommend to somebody? Like, would you focus on one thing,
Mhm.
get that kind of managed, under a level of well management or
Mm.
under control to a degree, and then move on to the next? Like, what would your approach be?
So I think first of all, it always has to be highly personalized. So it will vary for each individual, absolutely. However, there are some common patterns that we see, and especially working with people with ADHD. So in the first few years of my business, I was working with a lot of different chronic health issues all across the board, but I didn't have a neurodivergence focus. And now I exclusively work with adults with ADHD. So that has really shifted that approach,
Yeah.
because oftentimes people will come with this idea that, oh, they really want to work on their diet and they perhaps want to address their gut health and they want to like become highly motivated and they really want to tidy it up and they want to go to perfect very quickly. And they can kind of come with that energy. And then you speak to that overwhelm, right? So very quickly, often in the first session, it's quite obvious that people are actually at a point where they're very close to burnout, they're very overwhelmed, they're very highly stressed, their nervous systems are extremely kind of like in a sympathetic state, in a stress state all of the time. And they don't have the executive function capacity then to deal with organizing all of those steps. So oftentimes even something like a food diary, that would be hard for a person with ADHD anyway,
Yeah.
right? But then we do it in a super simple way where you just take a picture of what you eat, that's it, nothing else.
Oh, well, that's good.
And
Yeah.
yeah, but then you will see oftentimes, clients try to do that for 2 weeks and they come back with like one picture of a breakfast. They've not managed more, right?
Yeah.
And so we know like they're in such a highly stressed state, they don't have the capacity to deal with these other things. And so we need to really work on that first. So we really start to address the nervous system. I teach them exercises, how they can calm the nervous system down
Right.
so they can get that restoration. And it depends on where the individual is. For some people, everybody will feel an effect very quickly. But for some people, because of where they are in life, it's a longer process.
Sure.
For other people, they can then move on quite quickly to the next
Yeah.
thing. What we will always do is we will layer things slightly.
Okay.
So even if we then perhaps move on to the next topic and we might work on gut health or whatever other thing it is, sleep perhaps, we will still keep doing some nervous system exercises alongside, perhaps adding another layer to it, so that they can really kind of work on rewiring that system.
Right.
That's kind of something that we do with all clients, no matter what we do. There will usually be like a little add-on, something simple that they can try out, see if it works for them, if it resonates, if they want to keep it in their life. If not, fine, whatever, we'll move on to the next
Yeah.
thing. Just so that people can learn very practical strategies that can support them in their well-being every day.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So, why is it, do you think, that women particularly seem to struggle with, or GPs maybe, I don't know, professionals in the medical field seem to struggle to actually diagnose women with ADHD, and so often,
Mm.
I mean, I was, chatting to somebody just yesterday who said, for the last 12 years, I've been treated for depression and anxiety. And actually, I've actually, started researching ADHD, and I've discovered that actually I'm ADHD, and the depression and anxiety is almost like a byproduct of the ADHD. But it seems like a lot of GPs are um, sort of treating the most obvious symptom without really digging into what
Mm.
could be causing that depression or anxiety. Why do you think that is with women? Well,
Mm.
what do we have that makes it harder to understand that?
Yeah. So I would first of all say it traces primarily back to how the diagnostic questionnaires are written for ADHD and how our standing of ADHD has really been shaped by looking at males and mostly looking at boys.
Right.
So the fact that it presents differently for women, it hasn't gone into, the diagnostic codes yet, and it hasn't really shaped the general understanding of ADHD. So therefore, it's not being picked up as much. So I think one major factor, for instance, is that in women, symptoms tend to be more internalized.
Yeah.
So you in boys and in men, you will see more physical hyperactivity, whereas for women, you will see more cognitive hyperactivity. So constantly ruminating in their thoughts, going over things over and over again, building up a lot of stress through that. It's not that men don't have that either with ADHD, they have that as well. It's about the balance. How
Right.
much of what do we see really? And so, because the symptoms are more internalized in women, and we could talk about many more symptoms where that applies, but just to have given one example, because the symptoms are more internalized, it's harder to recognize from the outside.
Yeah.
It's even harder to recognize for the individual because only you know your own internal experience and you don't
Yeah.
know what it's like for somebody else. So you often think it's normal when it's really a symptom of ADHD.
Well, particularly if if that's been a lifelong, you just think that's who I am, I
Yeah.
guess. And what role do hormones play in ADHD?
Yeah, that's another big one. So estrogen and progesterone both have a significant impact on our cognitive function and on how ADHD expresses. And so with the fluctuations of those in, various life stages of women, they contribute to the expression of ADHD symptoms. So the biggest, most significant shift of that we see, of course, in perimenopause and menopause, when estrogen drops significantly and progesterone as well. And so for a lot of women, it's at that point where symptoms really come out. They're just exacerbated to the point where they can't cope any longer. But there are other stages in life as well, like past beyond pregnancy, so just postnatally in that phase as well, estrogen plummets dramatically, increases ADHD symptoms. Then in puberty with all of the fluctuations as well, that has a big impact on ADHD. So for a lot of girls, their ADHD will only really start to play up significantly in their puberty. Before then, it's not very much noticeable. And that's part of the issue with diagnosis, because formally the diagnostic code still says you have to have had symptoms before you were 12 years of age.
Right.
For a lot of girls, the symptoms didn't really manifest clearly until they were well beyond 12 years. So that's another part in the challenge as well. And I still see women today being denied a diagnosis because they cannot prove that they had symptoms before they were 12 years old. Fortunately, that's shifting. I think, the more experienced clinicians, they tend to not put too much weight on that kind of criteria. But if somebody really goes by the textbook, isn't perhaps very experienced, then that can be a real challenge as well.
Yeah.
So hormones have a huge impact on it. And for men, it's not that they don't have an impact at all, but it's not as clear cut. It's not as extreme as in women because we don't have these huge fluctuations.
Yeah. Well, I suppose because like you mentioned with, I mean, I remember when I was, when ADHD first sort of entered my world, was when my son was small. Not that he was diagnosed with ADHD, but you hear the talk of it, in the school environment. And it was always boys, because obviously boys, I guess, demonstrate or display their ADHD through sort of, boisterous activity, daredevil activity, jumping off garage roofs into swimming pools and, things like that, where well, I guess there would be some girls who would behave that way, but it's not common for a young girl to behave that way. So she would be maybe far more withdrawn and far more maybe into daydreaming or far more internalized, which I suppose years ago the research didn't even really pick that up. Their idea of inattentiveness was, not being able to complete a task or not, whereas it wasn't looking at more the internalized sort of working of how you kind of ruminate and hang on to thoughts and let those thoughts sort of grow and grow and grow. And I guess that leads into, for girls, into things like, it maybe shows itself up in the way you look from your body. So, anorexia, or overeating or things like that might be maybe a sort of something that is a link. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. So we do definitely see increased prevalence of eating disorders and disordered eating in ADHD as well, and for both genders, but hugely increased for women. Where of course it's a higher prevalence anyhow. So yeah, that's right. There's definitely a connection there as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Yeah,
Okay.
I would also say that partly ADHD used to be very much looked at as something that's causing problems around the person, not necessarily so much for the person itself. So once there are issues with academic performance,
Right.
once there are issues with causing trouble in the classroom, right? Those type of things. Once there is an issue with delivering at work, it's those kind of things where it gets picked up. And I think that's slightly shifting, and hopefully we see more significant shift there in the future, that now we understand what the biggest factor isn't how this has an impact on perhaps somebody is, the society around somebody, but on the individual, that because it comes with such a huge increased risk of all of those mental health conditions and so many other things, there's a lot of suffering that can be connected to
Yeah.
it, that it's really more around looking at the well-being of the individual rather than looking at what issues does this cause for the outside. And I think one of the problems that has led to with regards to women and girls is, as long as they're good in school, no one cares if they're a bit
Right.
daydreamy or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
So if you have maybe a girl that's perhaps, enjoying school, is really interested in it, that's where they get their dopamine, their stimulus. A lot of
Yeah.
us love learning because, that gives stimulus to the ADHD brain, getting new information.
Yeah.
So those in particular get overlooked. It's really only in girls, it tends to be picked up if they do perhaps not have that interest, or they struggle to a degree where they're so distracted that they really can't follow anymore. So again, it's about, does it cause problems that are picked up by somebody
Yeah.
else?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I work predominantly with entrepreneurs and business owners who have ADHD. And one of oftentimes what is really stressful for an entrepreneur, besides obviously other executive functioning sort of manifestations, but it's around sleep.
Mhm.
Because I think, you know, as a society, you programmed, that you should go to bed at 10 o'clock or whatever, and then sleep through until 6 o'clock and then be up ready for the day. But so often, people who have ADHD, their brain is like wired so that come 10 o'clock, there is no way that they are ever going to be able to go to sleep. And then they get into it becomes almost like a vicious circle, because you feel like you have to go to bed, then you can't sleep. And then you get more anxious about the fact that you can't sleep. So then you start not being able to sleep, and it just goes into this vicious cycle. So
Mm.
oftentimes, particularly as an entrepreneur, where you kind of manage your day and you are in control of your day, unless you're in a sort of a completely customer facing environment where you have to be present, in normal business hours. My advice to entrepreneurs is to find your rhythm and find your pattern that creates energy for you. So if you are really productive, I mean, like I have, somebody that I work with who goes to bed at like 7 o'clock at night, and then she's up at 3. Um,
Mhm.
and she is like on fire from 3 in the morning until like 6 o'clock in the morning. That's like her most productive time.
Yeah.
And then she'll need to, like, go and take a break at 6, and maybe go and have a power nap or something like that. But it's almost like giving yourself permission to find your own sleep pattern that works best for you and your own energy cycles. But if I
Mm.
was like in a normal job, that required me to be at work at 9 in the morning,
Yeah.
how do I address the problems I have with sleep?
Yeah. All right. So I think there are two aspects maybe to that. The one thing is, yes, I think it's part of why a lot of us with ADHD resist to be in those traditional work environments, because a 9 to 5 just doesn't work for us. Part of it being struggling to be up early and to be somewhere and function, but the other part being also that, to sustain your concentration over 8 hours. I mean, honestly, for neurotypicals, that's not ideal either.
Yeah,
But with ADHD, it just makes us very inefficient. So it
yeah,
just worked for us very well. So I think that's one of the reasons why a lot feel really drawn to being entrepreneurs or working in other careers where there is more of that flexibility or less traditional, kind of like not that strict time rhythm. Um, with regards to whether anybody should just go with when their brain kind of performs best, I think there's maybe a bit of a, excuse me, a bit of a challenge with that when we look at the health side of things.
okay,
So very often, like the client that you talk about, okay, going to sleep at 7 and waking up at 3. I can't see too many negative health implications from that. But what we see very commonly at ADHD is not going to sleep until 3 or 4 in the
Right.
morning, right? So it's almost like a night shift pattern. And we do know that that causes very significant health issues in the long run. And it really isn't conducive to the overall, like, having good brain function for the individual. It just means that oftentimes with ADHD, we can focus better when the world is asleep, right?
Yeah.
So there are less distractions. It's possibly dark around us. We might just have one little light on. We can even like tune out everything that's around us in the room.
Right.
So, and there are no rings and pings and dings. There's not constant notifications. You don't tend to get that many emails in WhatsApp middle of the night,
No.
right? So you don't need to be up and like cooking, take care of the kids or whatever. So you get into that zone where you can go into this nice hyper focus because you don't have the distractions.
Right.
And so for your client who works from like 3 to 6 in the morning, I reckon that is probably what would happen.
Yeah.
A lot of people with ADHD, that happens from like maybe 10, 11, midnight, by the time the rest of the world is asleep, right?
Yeah.
So I think it would be much more healthy for those individuals to kind of recreate those circumstances to
Okay.
support them to go into a hyper focus, but at different times of the day that are perhaps a bit more friendly towards their health. But it does have to be absolutely personalized. So like last year, I worked with a client who routinely got to bed at 3, 4 in the morning. In the night, would work on his own business, but did have a day job as well.
Okay.
And so struggled to get there in time for meetings, all of that, right? It became a huge stress factor for him. And so what we did together was to just get him to inch it forwards to 1 o'clock. And just the fact that he started to have a regular bedtime where he went to bed pretty much every night around 1 o'clock was a big improvement
Right.
from 3 or 4 in the morning and then having to show up for a meeting at 9. So it does have to be personalized. Now, I feel you did ask me actually a different question, actually.
Well,
Um,
no, but
so,
it's great that you gave that explanation. What I was saying is, like, if I were in a role or
mm,
that I needed to be
yeah,
like at my best, from 9 in the morning, but I
yeah,
was a real bad sleeper and I
yeah,
really struggled to sleep. Like, how could I improve my sleep hygiene so that
yeah.
I could actually, I know it's not going to happen, it's creating a new habit and a new routine and, giving yourself some discipline around it. But what advice would you give somebody?
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned sleep hygiene, right? And so the classical sleep hygiene things are like having a calm and tidy, quiet bedroom, don't work in your bed, those type of things. I think that's what most people perhaps have heard. And that's all still important. But I would say, especially for people with ADHD, a much bigger factor is light exposure.
Okay.
So light, natural daylight regulates our sleep and wake cycles.
Okay.
When we get up in the morning, or whenever we get up, when we are first exposed to daylight, that sets the master clock in our brain that regulates all our internal rhythms, all our circadian rhythms. And that clock will set that you start to get tired, I think it's 16 hours later.
Okay.
So, so early morning light exposure makes a huge difference. So if you want to shift your circadian rhythm from being a chronic night owl to having it easier to go to bed earlier, the one step is getting light exposure, daylight, not electric light in the house, daylight. And it doesn't have to be sunny, it can be overcast, but daylight, as soon as you possibly can in the day. So, for instance, let's say you get up at 9 o'clock, not particularly early. That's what you do. Um, but then go out as soon as you can
Right.
and get 10 to 15 minutes of that natural daylight that will help to set that rhythm.
Okay.
The other side of it, which I think is equally important is to avoid blue light exposure in the evening. So blue light, like it comes from our screens, our smartphones, all of those things, even from like, the light bulbs in our houses, that really prevents melatonin production. And the typical advice for that is 2 hours before bedtime to avoid that, because melatonin should go up 2 hours before bedtime. Now, that's actually not very good advice, and especially for ADHD is not nearly enough, because for your body to produce melatonin, a lot of things need to happen way before that. So it plays into, how your body has all of these internal timings. So basically, you need to reduce that blue light exposure from like at the latest 6 o'clock in the evening. And in winter, I would say even earlier, 4, 5 p.m., you would start. So you put strong blue light filters on all of your devices, or you wear blue light filtering glasses. You keep the lighting in your house relatively low, warm light, no like really bright overhead lights, none of that. And when you do that, only that, even without the morning light exposure, for a few days in a row, I always encourage my clients to do that as a little experiment because it's really powerful.
Yeah.
Try to go really extreme as an experiment for 3 days. Like from 4 o'clock, really avoid all bright lights. If you can do only candlelight level, that would be brilliant. But you don't have to go that extreme. You don't have to
go pioneer way.
Yeah, you don't have, there's an interesting experiment about that, but maybe we keep that story for another time. But the point is, keep it really low and really try to especially avoid that blue light. And then you will see your circadian rhythm shifts very quickly. After a few days of that, you will naturally start to feel tired much earlier. And for a lot of people with ADHD, and this was my personal experience, but I also see this in clients, is the first time in their life where they feel at maybe 10, 11, oh, actually feel quite relaxed and a bit tired and actually want to go to bed, which often is like a completely foreign feeling to them until then, because with ADHD, what we tend to do, because our brains are really hyperstimulated, maybe we get that second wind where we have like a cortisol release or stress hormone release. That then really helps us to concentrate. We go into that nice hyper focus, right? All of those things. So at that point, like, we don't go to sleep until we're so exhausted that we crash. And we can feel even like, why would anyone want to go to sleep? It's so boring, right? Why would anyone just go to sleep and like do nothing? Because they have nothing to do anymore. Like, our brains are always busy. We always have something to do.
Yeah.
Even if we don't perhaps have something we want to work on, our brain just won't shut up, right? So it just keeps going, 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 going.
Yeah.
And we don't have that habit of, creating that calm space for our thoughts to come down, because that's not easy. You have to
Yeah.
learn how to do that, right? And so yeah, we just don't sleep until we're completely exhausted and we crash. And that particularly happens with all of those people with those night owl patterns.
Yeah.
So that actually really shifts when you do those light kind of things. So that's, I think that would be the starting point. And even if you don't need to keep up extreme forever, but just do it for a few days and see what it does for you.
Right.
And
Okay.
then you find the kind of rhythm that works for you, what's easily implementable for you, and you can build on it one step after another over time.
So with the blue light, like, I suppose, like, you could order them online or whatever, but like, I mean, because it's quite extreme to say have no blue light from sort of 5 in the afternoon, because traditionally people would be wanting to watch TV or catch up. So I guess if you were having those blue light glasses that like block the blue light, they would also be beneficial, right? I mean, you could still
Yeah. So
kind of
again,
live a normal life, so to speak.
yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So the thing is, like, you can do all of these things and still live a normal life, right? You don't have to completely like change all the things that you love doing. You don't have to stop watching your favorite evening show. It's finding the way that works for you.
Yeah.
So the one thing would be to have those blue light filters on the screens directly, which I think that's really paramount to do that. And the inbuilt ones, they're not good enough. So you need to get other apps that are better that do that, depending on what kind of
Right.
device you.
Okay.
You play around with the settings with the intensity because it changes the colors on your screen, right? So what's okay for you? What's the level that you feel
Yeah.
comfortable with? There might be people who are perhaps working in, whatever design or something, that they need to see the true colors. So they can't do that when they're still working. You might be online shopping for clothes in the evening. You
Yeah.
want to see whether that sweater is purple or blue,
Yeah.
right? Um, there are those types of barriers, right? So then you negotiate your way through it. This is like, okay, I know this is going to affect my sleep, but I really want to do this now. So I switch the blue light filter off for the next hour.
Right.
And that case, your call, right? Um, Other people might say they want to wear the blue light glasses, blue light filtering glasses. It doesn't bother them. Other people don't want to wear the glasses. So really, then it really comes down to working out the
Yeah.
individual solutions. But there's so much that can be done, so
Right.
many options.
Yeah. So it's just a matter of experimenting until you find the thing that works for you.
Yeah, yeah, and also, maybe learning what really are the options without doing tons of research yourself. Knowing what are the good brands to go to, because there are a lot of like, cheap blue light filtering classes out there on, big online portals,
Yeah.
that aren't really very good. They're not gonna do much. So, and then you might go and like buy them for $20, and then they say like, oh, really, it didn't make a difference.
Yeah.
This thing doesn't work. But it's not that. It's just that you didn't have the right product for that.
Yeah.
So, and talking it through with somebody else, so you can already like work out, because we do also, have a lot of impulsive shopping in ADHD,
Yeah.
always going for the next shiny new thing. So very quickly, when I talk about this topic with people, they're just like, oh, let me just go and buy these like fancy blue light glasses. But I then, my role then is to make them pause for a second and
Okay.
think like, how likely are you going to wear those? Are you a person who actually likes wearing glasses? And sometimes they might say, oh no, actually, I hate even like putting on sunglasses. If they're
Okay.
not used to it, right? They might
Yeah.
not want to do that. So that's all part of the coaching process then, of course,
Yeah.
working for the individual. And
Yeah.
yeah, avoid damage along the way.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
you touched on addiction there,
Yeah.
like shopping addiction. So, somebody with ADHD, I mean, when we talk about addiction, people would maybe most commonly think about alcohol or drugs. But like, what other forms of addiction could somebody with ADHD show or have?
Yeah. Well, any of them, to be honest. So more classic drug addictions and alcohol, they are hugely more frequent. But yeah, shopping is a really big one. And people might not necessarily think about it as addiction,
Right.
because you need to have they actually reflected to have realized that it's not just, something they enjoy, but that it's an impulsive behavior where they really struggle to control it. They do it because it gives them pleasure in the moment, and they kind of it's a natural human thing. We all want to experience pleasure, and it's a stress relief. So do we use it as a coping mechanism? Is
Mhm.
it just a hobby, or is it a coping mechanism?
Yeah.
Does it cause us harm, right? Do we do it to an extent where it's damaging for us, it's not good for us? So really looking at those kind of mechanisms. So shopping would be a big one, but eating disorders as well. So binge eating disorder is a very big one we see in ADHD, but also other types of eating disorders. Even if we don't go to full-blown eating disorders, disordered eating, where you just maybe go a lot for sugar cravings, but you do not have a full-blown binge eating disorder. All of those things we see a lot in ADHD as well, and that has a lot to do with our neurochemistry, just the biology of how ADHD functions when our brains crave nutrients, because our brains need so much energy. They need so many nutrients to function well. When we're undernourished, we will constantly have cravings.
Right.
And so, yeah, that really plays into how those type of addictions,
Yeah.
um,
And gambling, I guess, is a big
yeah,
one. Yeah.
yeah. you say it there. Gambling is another really, really big one because of, like, again, all the addictions, how it stimulates dopamine release. It plays into, our reward pathways. We want to
Yeah,
go for the quick reward. We really struggle with waiting for a reward later on. The delayed gratification is really difficult in ADHD. So yeah, gambling is another really big
yeah.
one.
I wanted to ask you another question, but just briefly, anecdotally. I mean, I wouldn't say that I have a shopping addiction as such, but like, I cannot go, and it's even the most mundane, boring thing. Like if I had to go to the grocery store because I need to buy strawberries, say, and all I need is strawberries, I cannot. It's actually physically impossible for me to go into the grocery store and just buy strawberries.
Mm,
I feel like somehow like bereft if I walk
mm,
out and all I've done is bought strawberries. So I have to go and like browse all the aisles, and then like I I walk away with maybe 10 or 15 items that actually, I would need them, I'm sure, at some point,
yeah.
but it's like a physical impossibility. Like, my husband can do it, and so it's a safer bet for him to go and do the grocery shop, because I know if he goes, he's just going to buy what's needed and not all the
Yeah.
all the other things.
Yeah, absolutely. I can very much relate to that. Absolutely. So you're very right. We don't need to go to the extremes of addiction, but
Yeah,
that all just has to do with of course, nowadays supermarkets are set up like that, right? They want to all grab our attention, and all the products are, designed in a way to do that and
yeah,
to kind of make us want to buy them.
yeah,
And that goes for anybody, but we more easily fall victim to that. Then there is the element of self-control. So with executive function challenges in ADHD, self-control can be much harder, and just relying on your willpower to not do something
yeah,
can be so much harder. And you speak to that, like that it's physical uncomfortable, and
yeah,
we see that a lot in ADHD with a lot of different things, that it creates this sensation of really wanting to crawl out of your skin, or just feeling really, really
yeah.
physically uncomfortable, when the actual thing that's happening is not necessarily a physical thing. So yeah, we do see that a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, interesting. So, honestly, we could talk for hours on
Mm,
this, and we're kind of coming towards the end. But what I wanted to ask you is, like, how important is, well, there's kind of two final questions. This one is like, how important is diet, nutrition? You mentioned, like, nourishing your brain, and like the link with like sugar and exercise, and like, how do we, like, what would be sort of a healthy balance for somebody, to, like, when you consider all of that and the lifestyle that so often people, well, maybe not so much now because so many more people are working from home, so it gives them maybe more time to prepare a more nourishing meal, whereas maybe 2.5 years ago, where people were working in London and they'd leave home at 6 and they'd get home at 7, and then they just quickly throw on something or have a takeaway or whatever. So how important is eating a sort of a balanced, nutritious diet for
yeah,
ADHD?
hugely. So, okay, before I answer that question, I think also, with the patterns you just outlined, it depends so much on the individual again. So we see with working from home, then puts the entire challenge of preparing a healthy meal onto the individual.
Okay.
So for a lot of people, perhaps it's been much easier beforehand, where they depend, if they work in a big company, they might have a canteen or somewhere to go to. They can go and get a meal from there.
Right.
And we can debate quality, whatever, it depends on where
Yeah.
they are. But it takes away that challenge of them having to manage that. And very often what we see, so I also work with a lot of entrepreneurs, and very often we see that they don't stop for making lunch. It's not that they don't have the time, but it's this perception of not having time, because when you're an entrepreneur, there are always a million things to do and they never
Yeah.
stop. right? And also, it is challenging to run a business and make it profitable. So I think there's that element of just keeping working, and not stopping for it. So that's, yeah, can be much worse if they're left to their own devices at home, really.
Okay.
So, but maybe that's a separate conversation as well. So let me answer your question about, nutrition as such. So a lot of things go into nourishing our brain. Our brain uses about 20% of our body's energy at rest. So when we're not even moving about.
Okay.
So there's huge amount of it. So you can imagine when you are deprived of energy, your fuel, and other nutrients, so it's not just all about calories, your brain is going to feel that first. And your ability to concentrate will really go down significantly if you
Right.
do not have enough of those nutrients. So, all of our neurotransmitters, like dopamine, for instance, they are built from food. Our bodies make them, right? But they don't just come from nowhere, they come from
Right.
foods. Okay, so, and we primarily need proteins for those. So it's the building blocks of proteins that the body then uses to produce those neurotransmitters. So if you're eating a diet that's perhaps, a standard diet really in the Western world would be fairly high in carbs
Yeah.
and fairly low in good quality proteins. And so your body will constantly struggle to have enough of those proteins to really nourish the brain. And then with having that high load of carbs, it will really destabilize the blood sugar levels. So you don't need to be diabetic for that. It's something I
Yeah.
work a lot on with people with ADHD. They do not recognize that they have massive blood sugar swings up and down, crazy, also massively affecting sleep, for
Yeah.
instance. So you will have that when you're eating a lot of carbs, and that will really play into your energy levels, your ability to concentrate, all of that. Both low blood sugar and high blood sugar will do that. Um, so without getting too complex, I think really let's just keep it, the basics. Not have more carbs than your body can tolerate for healthy blood sugar balance. Having good proteins, that's maybe the first step, I would say. Having a good quality protein and enough of it for your body, which again is personalized, but to give people a rule of thumb, around 2 grams per kilogram of body weight.
Okay. Of
So,
protein
of protein, yeah,
per day or per meal per day.
per day, per
Right.
day, per day.
That's quite
So
a lot, eh? Yeah.
that is a lot. That
Yeah.
is a lot. So if you take a person that's, weighs 70 kilo, that's 140 grams of protein. Again, as a rule of thumb, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So some people will need less. If you're very physically active, you might need more,
Yeah.
but round about that, you can say 1.8 to 2 grams. So that is a lot. So if you then try to think about how do you even achieve that, it's not that simple. Especially when people are on a vegetarian diet or even a vegan diet, it becomes almost impossible because you can't eat that many lentils, frankly. And also you get a huge amount of carbs with those as well. So it's not so easy to do, but it's not to make anybody feel frustrated. It's just to be realistic about it. And they also say that protein should be spread evenly throughout the day. So you should have maybe 30 grams per meal.
Right.
That's quite hard to achieve in some instances. So like 2 eggs for breakfast, people might think it's a high protein breakfast. That's 12 grams. That's
Okay.
so it's those type of things, but don't get too frustrated. Just start simple with what you can do, right? So I know a lot of people will start to feel quite overwhelmed when they hear that. Start with what you can do. So just
Yeah.
first of all, have the awareness. Perhaps you might need a little bit more good protein in your diet. So pick one meal in the day where that's easy for you to do, or the easiest. It might be dinner. So
Yeah.
it just maybe you'll have more dinners with a little bit more good quality protein. That's one way to start. For other people, it might be shifting to, away from cereal and
Yeah. toast or
Okay,
whatever.
all of that, right, to a high quality protein breakfast. That's really gonna make the biggest difference, I think. So doing something like that, but really look at what can I do at this moment that doesn't overwhelm me. Start from there, start with the protein, and think about your water intake, things like that. And then you can work on the fine tuning
Yeah,
over time,
yeah,
really, because
yeah,
that's a long journey. That's why when people come with this huge enthusiasm to change their diet and they have that expectation that it can all happen very quickly, that's frankly a challenge as a coach to manage that well, because you do not want to take away somebody's enthusiasm,
no, no,
but also we have to, and that's a big challenge with any topic working with clients with ADHD. You have to manage that enthusiasm for something with having realistic
no,
expectations as well, because otherwise you will get very quickly overwhelmed and frustrated and very likely to just fall off the horse and not follow with the
yeah,
journey. So that's an important step, really, to just take small steps and be patient with that, which,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It's so interesting. But it is something, I guess, like you said, if you sort of start with baby steps and just focus on one meal a day,
Mm,
that you can make a difference to. Because, yeah, I mean, if you look at most people's average diet, it's carbohydrate rich. You might have cereal or toast in the morning, a sandwich at lunchtime, pasta at night, and
yeah,
your protein is maybe minimal
yeah,
in all of that. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And obviously, cut down on sort of refined sugars and so on, so you don't have those spikes as well in your
yeah,
blood sugar. Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah. So my final question to you is about the brain. And it's a nice heavy topic to end with, but um, what they call the plasticity of the brain. So essentially, research has indicated that the brain can uh, and they've seen it, maybe with people who've had severe brain damage, who've gone through a lot of rehabilitation, and they've seen how the brain can, repair its, not fully maybe, but repair itself and grow again through rehabilitation and sort of focused and dedicated exercise. So if we look at ADHD, where we know that it is, well, research indicates, if you have it, you have it. It's a lifelong condition. But I'm one of those people that believes that you can manage your ADHD to the point where you can live as a life that you wish to live, and the way
Mm,
you go about it is obviously through a lot of focus on it and a lot of dedication to improving and growing the brain that needs to, and like forging new neuro pathways. Uh,
mm.
what's your take on that?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So first of all, neuroplasticity is very well researched. So it's not an abstract idea, really. We know absolutely our brain has that capacity until the moment we die. So we don't lose it ever. It can always change. And anything we do shapes our brain for the better or worse. So all perhaps for yourself negative habits will reinforce constantly those pathways in the brain. So you are more likely to the next time to engage with that habit again. And the same happens with any positive kind of habit,
Yeah,
right? So the more often you do it, the easier it becomes. So, I mean, that's very basic habit formation, and that's how neuroplasticity works as well. Um, so, can you repeat your question? um,
so I suppose what I'm trying to, what I'm trying to do is like give people with ADHD some hope, if you like, to say that yes, it can be, it can be really a challenge to live with ADHD, and some people really have more adverse effect than others. But what
yeah.
I'm trying to do is give people hope to say that it isn't hopeless that you have
Yeah,
ADHD and that life is going to be like just terrible for you,
yeah,
because if you work with somebody who understands how the brain operates and who understands the executive functioning challenges and understands, like how to create sort of habits and new ways of operating, that actually slowly but surely you can actually start
mm,
managing your ADHD to have
absolutely. And
a
I think
more
a main point
productive
there
life.
really, I think a main point there really is it becomes so much easier.
Yeah,
So when it feels like a struggle in the beginning, it won't stay like that. It
yeah,
becomes easier and easier over time. And we know that, of course, a lot of individuals with ADHD who have perhaps, more challenge. Of course, we have those people who see it as a gift, and for whatever reasons, their life circumstances have meant that they've been able to navigate this relatively well all of their life, and they don't feel too many adverse effects from it. But I think for the majority of people with living of ADHD, that's not the story. And that can play into a lot of, very negative self beliefs, a lot of not having very much confidence, not really believing in their own abilities. And that is something that will change very much as well. That in the beginning, when people can feel quite overwhelmed by having to do these changes, and also can feel like it's this insurmountable mountain, and it's like, oh, now I have to work on myself for years and years and years. It
yeah,
can feel very negative. But actually, that is going to shift very quickly once you get on the way, because you will feel in your body and in your brain how much better you are when you engage into some of these shifts. And every step that comes after will be easier and
yeah,
easier and easier and easier. And I think anyone gets to a point where this is actually fun, this is really enjoyable, is really good. It doesn't all have to be, now you have to lead this boring life. You can never have a plate of pasta and a glass of wine again.
yeah,
That's really, really not what it is.
yeah,
So, yeah, I think absolutely, like, our brain's neuroplasticity is really amazing, and it really helps us to shift those thinking patterns as well, and, just feel more positive about ourselves and our lives, and just make it your lifestyle basically, and really love that and enjoy that. And things where, they are perhaps not conducive to your health in that regard, maybe you love going to a festival and being up all night and dancing the night away and maybe having a few drinks, but you don't have to stop doing that, because it doesn't define the rest of your life.
yeah,
And so you have those healthy habits that balance out
yeah,
the other ones, and they will give you something positive for yourself, right? You get joy from that, and
yeah.
dopamine and all of those
Of
things. So
course,
yeah.
yeah. Yeah. Yeah. And I guess it starts with educating yourself so that you understand, what it is, what your challenges are, and then knowing what you can do about it. And like you say, it doesn't mean that you can't, I don't know, have a boozy night out if you so wish, but don't make a boozy night out 5 nights a week and then, yeah. So about balance, like really anything in life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think I've kind of like answered all the most sort of important questions I wanted to ask you. And like I said, I mean, I love this topic, and we could talk about it for hours, and I would still,
Mm.
I'm sure, have lots of questions. But I think what you've what you've shared will be really helpful for the people who watch this. So thanks, Vera. I really appreciate your time.